Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Conversations on Groong episode. Today, we look at the wider collapse of democratic norms in the South Caucasus. Azerbaijan's war crimes and political persecutions go unpunished, and the former Artsakh leaders in Baku's jails and kangaroo courts are only one aspect of that. Inside Armenia, the Pashinyan government now mirrors many of Aliyev's methods, from jailing opposition figures to attacking the Armenian church, all while the West looks away. We are joined by Garen Jinbachian, Community Relations Officer for the ANCA Western region, who has been raising these concerns in international forums.
Before we begin, a quick note. If you value independent coverage of human rights, political repression, and the status of democracy in our region, please consider supporting Groong. Your support helps us keep these conversations going and reaching more people. And please like, comment, and share this episode. It helps amplify our voice at a time when these topics often get pushed aside. The link for donations is podcast.groong.org/donate. And thank you for all of those generous people who have donated to us in the past.
Garen Jinbachian, welcome to the Groong podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome, Garen. Nice to have you.
Thank you so much, Avikchan.
Garen, since this is your first time on our show, please give us a little bit of a brief on your work on behalf of the human rights of Armenians globally as part of your position with the ANCA.
I am very happy to say that I've not had a long run in the ANCA, but I've had a very long run in anything and everything to do with Armenian organizational life. I was practically born into it. Born and raised in Lebanon, so you get to live in that organizational sphere where you uniquely interact with Armenians or majoritively interact with Armenians. Everything you do is in Armenian. You preserve the language, the culture, all of it. And so when we kind of moved to the United States, California was pretty much, kind of on the same scale, but with its differences, of course. And I don't know, that spirit of being in an Armenian community, always helping the community, putting whatever effort you can, whatever spare time you have into Armenian organizational life, kind of never left. Not with me, not with my family. And so I was fortunate enough that one of the board members of the ANC Western region about a year ago kind of found me at one of the protests happening in LA. We happened to be chatting, discussing this, that, whatever, and evidently we were kind of on the same path towards protecting Armenian human rights, protecting Armenians' dignities, all of that. And so we had a similar worldview. And so that's kind of how I got involved in the Western region. I did an internship at the DC office. That's where I was quote unquote trained for the position. And then I came back here about a year ago to take on the community coordination task of this office.
Welcome on board, and glad to have you participating in the ANCA, which is a very important organization.
Thank you.
Mr. Jinbachian, speaking on behalf of the ANCA Western region at the recent OSCE event that was focusing on human rights, you forcefully addressed the ongoing abuses against the Armenian captives following the 2023 genocidal cleansing of Artsakh, as you phrased it. You documented evidence of torture, coerced confessions, and degrading treatment, stating that these acts constitute a broader, and I'm quoting, a broader pattern of impunity, a campaign of dehumanization meant to terrorize, humiliate, and erase. You concluded your address with a stark warning, asserting that Azerbaijan has not only broken international law, it has betrayed the very framework of collective security that this organization, and by that you mean the OSCE, was built to uphold. So to begin with, can you tell us more about this conference, who attended it, and with what expectations did you yourself attend?
Yes. Okay, so the OSCE Human Dimension Conference is a yearly conference held in Warsaw, Poland, every year. And so every year during that time, all the OSCE delegation are in one place trying to get some sort of a debate going or an update of sorts of the OSCE region and anything and everything that has to do with problems in the human dimension. Now, human dimension means human rights, freedom of speech, the works, all of it that we try to uphold in a quote unquote Western civilization. And so that conference, that 2-week conference, was attended by the delegation and members of civil society, usually NGOs, independent workers, media outlets, stuff like that. So we attended as part of an American NGO, which we are, and our point was to raise the issue of Artsakh, to let them know that Artsakh's story did not reach its final chapter. This is not how this is supposed to end. And unfortunately, when I was there for the 2 weeks, I saw a lot of Azeri presence. Now, mind you, I think this was the first time in my life being in the same room with Azeris. Not how I would have imagined it would be, but nevertheless, I don't know if this is related to that particular case that I was in the same room with them or not, but I fell ill for 2 weeks afterwards, so might be that. I don't know. The nefarious lies they were spreading must have caught on to me. But yes, so we did see a lot of gongos, I think you say, like governmental NGOs of quotes, a lot of them kind of, repeating the state's Aliyev's rhetoric of saying, Armenians are pests and they are war criminals. The ones that are held in Baku right now are war criminals. They are not just political captives. They should not be treated with mercy, stuff like that. And when you hear stuff like that, when you constantly see and hear the people that you're trying to protect, and the human lives you're trying to save, be talked to in that manner, I don't think there's anything else you can do than just speak up, at least speak up, and at least put a very, if not aggressive, then a persuasive front to say, okay, this is an OSCE Human Dimension conference. The whole point of this conference is to defend human rights in that OSCE region. Then how is it that we're not saying anything? We're staying silent when these things are being, shouted from rooftops. How is that possible? How are we not in a very hypocritical situation right now? So that's exactly what happened. The expectation of going to the OSCE was first that to keep the Artsakh story alive, to never let it rest, to have international monitoring organizations and bodies always speaking about Artsakh and the situation there, as well as getting some political help with other country delegations, spreading the word that these are some of the strategies that you might you know look to do in the near future to counter Azerbaijan, to help Armenians back into Artsakh.
So you talked about Azerbaijani government NGOs. Were Was anyone from the Republic of Armenia present? In what capacity?
Not as much as we would have hoped, but yes, there were some Armenians. Most of them have been, with most we've had working relationships with other events, or this is something that happens yearly. So there were some that were quite experienced in the OSCE's Human Dimension Conference. For example, we had Siranur Sahagyan from ALC and International Comparative Law in Yerevan. She came in her capacity as the executive director, as well as the lawyer of the political prisoners in Baku. And so, yes, there were some Armenians present that we could have relied on to kind of echo the message of Armenians of Artsakh, but unfortunately, There were not that many of them. There were just probably 3 or 4 NGOs, as opposed to in the tens Azeris that were present. And second of all, the fact that the Azeri state propaganda that was going on was something that was aided by the Azeri delegation, and you could see from the grin on the delegate's face, from the reactions to every time one of these gongos came out to speak, uh, it was something well coordinated that was lacking on our side, unfortunately.
Okay. And I think in your speech, by the way, I saw a brief speech of yours. I don't know if that was the extent of it, or what other meetings you participated in. But in that speech, you said that the rule of law cannot coexist with selective justice, which is what we're experiencing. And I wanted to ask you, what concrete dangers does this selective justice pose to credibility of international institutions like the OSCE, when such brazen defiance of norms and international rules um, gets swept under the carpet?
Yeah, it is very unfortunate that it is the situation where values do not dictate policies, rather economic benefits and interests and political socioeconomical factors weigh in sometimes more than morals itself. And then there you have moral relativism that comes into play. It's a really unfortunate situation to deal with, because, and I wanted to get into this a bit later on, but I'll get into it now as well. Uh, there are the 3 basic types of arguments that you should have, or the 3 pillars of an argument that you should have. The ethos, pathos, and logos situation. So in terms of like our argument, pathos certainly does exist. Logos certainly does exist. Ethos certainly does exist, but there's one other factor that we have to consider, is state interest, if they're interested in this or not. Unfortunately, for the time being, uh, it doesn't really look the case. So our job is now to make it, to make it something that they want, to make it evident that um, defending Armenians and Armenians being on that land and owning that land because it's their sovereign right is something that it would be beneficial to not only the OSCE but its delegate members as well, its members as well. And so that is pretty much the difficult part of this whole issue, because in another unfortunate turn of events, the Armenian delegation was not helping at all.
You mean the
The
official
speech,
Armenian government delegation?
yes, correct.
Okay.
Because as far as
There
I know,
were
Siranush Sahakyan is not a part of the government
Yes,
delegation.
yes. The governmental delegation,
Hmm.
I'm saying. No, she came in there as a civil society, just like myself.
Hmm.
But the governmental delegation that was there did not help whatsoever. While we were raising issues of Artsakh, he was just rambling on about some generic speech or whatever. It's a very unfortunate situation to be dealing with. But all we can say is we hope that this is not too long and we can go about discussing the big issues and the important, vital issues, uh, and just leave that for the rest of the folk who don't have an existential threat on their hands.
Garen, given the current situation where, as you mentioned, the state interests are obviously dictating the way that Europe is relating with Armenia and Azerbaijan. Of course, they claim to assign great value to democracy and human rights and such, but they have treated Azerbaijan's brutal dictatorship on the same level as Armenia's. Are these conversations had with the European states? Because we know their public stance. We know what, for example, Ursula von der Leyen says or what Kaja Kallas says. But when you have conversations with parliamentarians from Europe, what kind of conversations are those? Where do they really stand? Do they actually stand by their values at all?
Most of them on a personal level do. when you get to that kind of unofficial meeting type of thing, when you get in a more kind of a not on a public stage, but you get to see their human side. You get to see that they actually do think that this is wrong. They think that something very wrong is happening. And I don't know if that's comforting or even more enraging, or it should be even more I don't know what to say, humiliating, vexing, whatever it might be. But you get to see that they personally do care. But something that has been said multiple times throughout uh, these meetings with different delegations was that how can we be the front runners of these issues, let's say, right? Putting pressure on Azerbaijan, putting pressure on Turkey, getting Armenians back into Artsakh. How can we be the front runner and not have the actual government of Armenia be the front runner of it? That's sort of most of the trepidation that we see, given the fact that the Armenian government is not advocating for that. The Armenian government is not putting a strong stance to further those pursuits, and so it becomes really difficult when you have to explain uh, what the difference is exactly, and why uh, you know um, why our legitimacy and our credibility here matters, and why this issue must not be thrown under the rug just because an Armenian government who happens to be in power at the moment, an administration who happens to be at power at the moment, um, chooses to do so, right? And that's kind of the whole predicament. That's kind of the whole predicament that we're in. And so these meetings become more complicated, and it's just how it is, unfortunately, for the time being.
You were saying we don't know exactly how to feel. Well, I feel on that level, unemotionally, I must say, that Europe or the West is an unreliable partner. I don't feel like they're humiliating or frustrating. Of course, all of those feelings, but beyond the feelings, I just when they say, for example, trust us, we're going to help you, we're going to help you do this, achieve this, or whatever. I can't trust these people because what they are saying and what they're doing do not really match. So, and then of course they stand up and call Aliyev a reliable partner. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, it's the same in politics. Politics is a contact sport. You have to get hit every once in a while, right? And in my opinion, seeing studying a bit of history, not really too much, but from what I can see, uh, there's no reliable partner whatsoever. You can't have reliable partners in a political ideology, let's say, and much less right now when everything is governed by interest and economic benefit and all of that, right? Because let's face it, if you're doing business with one country, then suddenly another country becomes more beneficial for I don't know, buying rice from, and it's cheaper. You don't have as many fees to pay, and whatever it might be, you'll switch instantaneously. It all comes to zeros and ones at the end of the day. It's not, unfortunately, it's not governed by moral politics anymore. Now, I don't know if history books were only written having that in mind, or it was always like this. I leave that up to, the historians to interpret. But the world we're seeing right now, the moral values mean absolutely nothing. It's just a bystander that gets it's a byproduct that makes morally sense for the West to say, we're on the right side. But when it comes to our dollars, when it comes to our euros, when it comes to our gas, when it comes to our oil.
So, do you see the West ever holding Azerbaijan accountable for its human rights violations?
Yeah, it could, but it's on us to make the environment right for that. And that is why organizations such as ours exist. It's not the fact that we're trying to do something that is undoable. there was a time where it was unimaginable that the United States would support a country like Azerbaijan, for example. It was unimaginable. There was a time in history over Armenia. By defeating Armenia, you get to have Azerbaijani support. That was something that was unfathomable. But it happened because there were lots of forces that put a lot of work, a lot of lobbying into making that happen. The point of our organization and the point of all diasporan organizations such as these are to create that environment where it becomes beneficial for you to choose Armenian side over any other side, because at the end of the day, that's what counts.
Okay, let's switch the topic a little bit, Garen. Since 2020, Armenia has been in a continuous decline of democratic values. I would argue even since 2018, but let's say to 2020. And in 2021, the elections, in our opinion, were neither free nor fair. All you have to do is recall Pashinyan campaigning with a hammer or a sledgehammer, threatening to crack the heads of opponents, slamming them against walls, and whatnot. And in the past couple of years, Pashinyan's government has followed Aliyev's example in jailing political opponents. Although instead of sham trials, more often than not, Pashinyan orders so-called pretrial detention, and which is renewed indefinitely until the threat to him disappears or is marginalized. Currently, there are more than 40 political prisoners in Armenia. Something unheard of I would say, in a European country, but the people that you talk to, the organizations that you met, are completely happy, it appears, with the situation. The same with the Armenian church. Pashinyan is on a campaign to replace the Armenian Catholicos with someone who is not opposed to his political views. Many archbishops and priests are jailed, and just Armenia has physically 10 dioceses in Armenia. The heads of those 3 dioceses, bishops, are currently in jail. People like Samuel Karapetyan, who has spoken out in support of the church, are also in jail, and so on and so forth. Of course, as I said, from the West, we hear crickets or outright dismissal of the problem, and even encouragement for the government. So, as your organization is, very much involved with Armenia, and we've seen you defending the Armenian church in the past, why, maybe we're asking the same question or in different contexts, but is there anything left of democracy in Armenia? And is any of this registering with the West in any capacity? Maybe not publicly, but were you able, for instance, to raise such issues at the conference, even on a private level? And what were the responses that you got?
Yeah, so first of all, we have to really understand why the church is being targeted. And I say the church and not the clergymen, because ultimately that's what is happening. These attacks on the diocese, the establishment of the church, mentioning that the Echmiadzin is nothing but, what was it, a warehouse, something like that. He said, whatever those rhetorics might be, we really need to understand that ultimately the target of these is not just this bishop, that archbishop, whatever. That's not the point. The point is, we tried saying this multiple times. The true target, is the nationalistic values that the church holds. The sense of pride in your nation that the church gives and has given throughout the years. That's what's being targeted. That is the adversary they're trying to crush at the moment. And now, by the way, if my memory serves me right, this did happen kind of 2018, 2019 time frame as well, where the same people tried giving it a go, but it didn't really work, and so it kind of got delayed for a couple of years, and then it's kind of blossoming again right now with the same narratives, the same explanations, whatever. So the thing is, when you're targeting that nationalistic ideology, that national pride that uh, you have to understand who wants that.
Yeah.
Ultimately, every country who wants to dominate over the other would want you to lose that sense of national pride in your nation, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of just the 101 of taking over a country, let's say. And so this is the work that is happening to build up to there. That's why this fight is very important. That's why resisting this, that's why putting a front to it, just as you guys are, just as all of those who are now politically imprisoned and in Armenia are doing. Uh, that is something that should be unacceptable, and it really does pain me to be able to speak this way, right? It really brings me physical pain, uh, excruciating pain to talk about our nation in this manner, just because some political party is now hell bent on destroying everything that we have ever thought of Armenia to be. And so it's really, really disheartening. But at the end of the day, you have to be the adult sometimes, and you have to take some decisions that have to be taken. And you have to put a front to this. You have to say the church uh, should not be dealt with in this manner. This is not something that you would do if you have a problem with the church. If you have a problem with the church, you deal with it internally. You don't jail them. You talk to them. You kind of try to, fix it in any way, shape, or form that you can. But you don't say, I'm going to appoint the next Catholicus and that's going to be it. That's not how it
And we'll
works.
talk we'll talk about the church a little more, but I was more interested in the general situation, like 40 political prisoners, and you meet these guys at the conference. What do they say when you tell them about this? In private,
Uh,
maybe, or whatever you can sort of, any, I mean, you mentioned some of the feedback. Are they just saying like, I'm sorry, we know this is the situation, but we can't do anything? Like I've heard similar comments from others, but well, I've met some people working in the NGOs, but I'm curious to hear what the environment, what the ambience there is nowadays in terms of talking about this.
in terms of NGOs and the NGOs that we've met with, when we talk about these issues with them, again, they're usually quite receptive, but most of their offering is just a human rights report, right? That's kind of all you can do at this point. When you come as an outsider to view what is happening, there isn't much leeway for you to work in. But in terms of the delegation that, was made aware of these situations, again, it's the same issue. When you and your delegation and the people that hold the highest authority of that land do not want to pursue this, then there isn't really much to do. And you have to be really, really careful when you do that,
Yeah,
because you don't want to make Armenia the enemy of the OSCE or any of these international bodies. That's not the point. And you have to really carefully maneuver these conversations, so you get to a place where you say, this is not Armenia, this is just temporary. But
yeah,
most of the work has got to be done internally, and most of my time I spent there was talking with the civil society in Armenia, giving whatever I could to let them know that at the end of the day, it's up to them. It's up to the people of Armenia. And so, in my opinion, the way to go is education, civic education, history education. Both of them are really failing in Armenia right now. We've seen the new textbooks, right, of history, that make me want to curl up and just disappear from this universe. But it's that sort of thing that we have to put our battles in.
yeah.
Um,
But I mean, I think that there's maybe it's very big plan, or maybe it's a small plan, but there is a effort to erase or reprogram Armenian identity, and the school curricula are part of that. And earlier, the only reason why I sort of interrupted you is earlier you used the word nationalism, and I don't want to, of course, feign that word. I don't want to disown that word, but I think it's also important to say that, the type of nationalism that normally is perceived in the West is, maybe like,
They think of
is
nationalism as fascism,
yeah,
basically, which
yes,
is not the case
and this
here.
is of course, yes, with small states is different, and also we're talking about identity, core things about Armenian identity. Am I nationalistic if I want justice for my genocide, surviving grandparents and their kin who were not so lucky? I don't know, so yeah, I think it's important to highlight that, and I think that the attacks against the church may also, are also in that vein.
Hovik, can I add one more
Yeah,
thing to what you were
yeah,
saying about
yeah,
grand plans, little plans, and whatever? What you just said is exactly what we're seeing inside Armenia. So
yeah,
there's probably some kind of a plan. But remember that a few years ago, there were similar attacks on Georgian identity in Georgia, north of us. So the plan is not just for Armenia. I think there is a reshaping of the entire region that they are trying to do.
yeah,
And some of the concerns that we've had, we ascribe to Azerbaijan and Turkey. It may or may not be the same with Georgia, but I've read a lot of the pressure on them has come from the West as well. What I see is that there's a lot about these cornerstones of national identity. I'm not even talking about nationalism or anything like that, national identity that are a threat to the globalist view that comes from the West.
Yeah,
yeah,
it is the case, unfortunately, and it's something to strive to correct. Now, unfortunately, we have to really define the words that we're talking about. And thank you, Hovik, for putting that at the radar. But at the end of the day, when you are surrounded by everyone that wants to take a piece of your land, it either you have the interests of your country in your mind as a top priority, or you don't. That's what we're discussing, and that's
yes,
what needs to be taught to the children of Armenia and the diaspora, to have that in mind and to say, our lands are not something that should be given away, nor taken by no show of force. That's basically what we mean when we talk about these things. And in terms of national identity, organizations like ours work with organizations from around the world to keep the Armenian identity alive. And it's really an interesting development that now we see that it's become equally difficult in Armenia to keep that national identity as it is in the diaspora. We've always had the sense that, the diaspora, since you're, surrounded by strangers, by foreigners, by the people who are not necessarily Armenian, and you're forced to, be friends with them, break bread with them, whatever it might be, that you might kind of dilute your culture and become part of where you're living. But as it turns out, it's fairly simple to do that in your own country as well. Unfortunately, if you're not keeping an eye on it, then it just kind of goes out of control.
Yeah, Garen, I want to pick up a thread that you were talking about earlier about NGOs. One NGO that has gone beyond press releases and has taken action for over 30 years with since Armenia's independence, possibly even before, is Christian Solidarity International. And I believe that their president, John Aigner, was at the ANCA banquet earlier, like a month and a half ago in Los Angeles, and you interviewed him. Can you talk about what you heard from him? He is a wonderful man.
Yes, it was a very interesting interview that I did. It was the very first interview that I hosted, so you guys let me know how that was, and if I have a career in
we'll have
that,
the link in the
if
show
need
notes.
be.
We'll have our
We will.
listeners maybe judge, so anyway,
So Yeah, it was a very interesting interview, and I'm glad that my first time interviewing was with Dr. John Eibner because he was such a knowledgeable and deep thinker that it genuinely was interesting being in the room. I didn't even feel like an interview. It was just like a conversation I had with, someone who's seen a lot of stuff in that region.
Talk about
And
a value-driven man. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And as has discussed multiple times throughout the our talk right now, the value-driven men are in limited quantities at this point. So it was an honor for me to have a chat with him in that capacity. And so I got to actually understand the whole chronological sense of the work that the CSI has done for Armenia, for Artsakh, for the Christian Armenians there, the heritage, all of it. And it started from the 1990s all the way to today, and they still do everything in their power. And all I can say is more force to them. I know that they were one of the leads in the Lady Cox Rehabilitation Center in Stepanakert.
Right.
They were giving emergency aid, humanitarian aid, medical, psychological support, whatever they could give, and all the while doing international advocacy, just like we're doing, and accompanying organizations such as ours to get this on the public international stage, let's say, because it is something that is constantly being thrown under the rug. And so it was very interesting to see how much, just exactly how much the CSI has contributed to our society and how much, in a very weird way, and you see that in the interview, he says the Armenian situation, the Artsakh situation, helped the CSI evolve its mission to what it is now in, say, the African countries where there are Christian persecutions and genocide and all of that, and how much of the Armenian story touched them as an organization. And now they do what they do and they are what they are. And it was very interesting to understand all of this.
When we're talking about this attack against the church, sometimes we hear, and I don't know if this is the appropriate criticism or not, but sometimes we hear criticism that, okay, where is the ANCA? Why isn't the ANCA do more? So since we have you here, it seems like the ANCA has been the replacement of many of the Armenian institutions that are supposed to safeguard our identity. But t tell us what the policy of the ANCA is towards the defense of the Armenian church, and I've seen you issue press releases or tweets about it, but is there anything you can tell us about the activity that you're doing right now?
Yeah, first of all, it's really important to understand, uh, although you say that the ANCA is replacing some Armenian governmental branches, let's say, or whatever, it's uh, it's not as simple as that. Uh, just for a public record, because the ANCA is an Armenian American organization, and it is based in the United States and lobbies to say, to convey the interests of Armenian Americans in the United States to the United States government. We do not have any jurisdiction over, what happens in Armenia. We are not related to any of the governmental institutions. We do work with them whenever necessary. We would like to include them in everything that we do, but our ultimate goal is conveying the will of the Armenian Americans in the United States of America to the government of the United States of America. So, just for the audience to get a very clear understanding of what the limitations of the ANCA is as a whole. And so when we talk about these stuff, it's really difficult. I mean, it's difficult on a personal level as well to talk about a country you love very much turn into what it is, fearing what it might be, even worse. But when it comes to anything in official capacity of ANCA, then you have to be really, really careful to stick to what you can do in your let's say arena that you're playing in, right? And when we speak with elected officials in this regard, when we speak to the public in this regard, we always hold in our minds that this is what the Armenian American public is believes in, and this is what they want us to say. We're the spokesperson. And so in terms of internal Armenian affairs, all we can say is that we can see that there's a democratic backsliding, and this is not good for any country, much less Armenia, in a very existential, existential survival state it's in right now. But we do not, in any shape, talk about the internal governance and politics of Armenia. That is for the Armenian government to do through its embassies and consulates throughout, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yep, that makes sense. Some of the concerns I have don't really have to do with what the ANCA is doing. Of course, we do not have any kind of jurisdiction about what goes on in Armenia, but the Armenian church is a global church. So the difficulties it is undergoing in the Republic will have repercussions all the way in the diaspora here in our community, in my case, in Glendale, for example. So, of course, those concerns do emanate all the way from the Republic to here. All right, let's leave it there for today, Garen. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
And thank you so much for having me. This was a pleasant conversation.
For us as well.
Thank you, Garen.
That's our show today. This episode was recorded on November 23, 2025. We've been talking with Garen Jinbachian, who is the Community Relations Officer for the West Coast Office of the Armenian National Committee of America. His efforts are focused on advancing the Armenian cause, Haitad, by fostering strong community ties and gathering feedback to shape advocacy strategies. For more information, go to our show notes, podcasts.groong.org/episode number, and you can click on the bios for everyone in the show.
Don't forget to make sure you're subscribed, like, comment, and share our podcast with your friends. And if you feel so inclined and are capable, then please consider giving us either a one-time or a monthly donation. It helps us keep going. It helps us reach more people. So we appreciate it. Thank you.
We will talk to you soon, folks. Actually, we're recording tomorrow, but we'll be back on the air very soon.
Yeah. Thanks. And from Yerevan, I'm Hovik Manucharyan.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.